have been doing research on mobile money innovation. I'm sure all of us here are aware of M-Pesa, a mobile phone-based financial service, which has morphed into mobile banking and is now integrated into the formal banking system in Kenya. So I was interested in how technology can drive or induce societal change. My background has been in IT and finance, so I was aware of the commercial banking in Kenya, financial exclusion in formal banking in Kenya, and the introduction of information and communication technologies in Kenya and how that was changing the landscape of financial services. And for me, mobile money innovation was exciting, even on a personal level, looking to see how a mobile phone, a very basic technology, can change the way money is exchanged, the way money is managed, the way people save, the way people invest in Kenya. And I was interested to understand how that process occurred. And I came across this sustainability transitions approach, which initially was quite overwhelming, but was quite intuitive because it basically argues for the role of technology in inducing change. And I thought, okay, let's see whether this is applicable. And in this case, rather than focusing on environmental sustainability, which most scholars in this area focused on, I was more interested in social sustainability, if I could call it that. And in this case, this shift from financial exclusion to financial inclusion. There's no time to unpack these terms because they're complex in themselves. But just looking at the Kenyan case, in the 90s and the early 2000s, 80% of the Kenyan population did not have access to formal financial services. But these 80% were using alternative ways of managing money through their own social networks, through informal financial groups, which have been discussed here, or through mattress banking, putting money under your mattress, basically. And if we fast forward to now, 2016, 82% of Kenyans have access to formal financial services, of which mobile money is part of it. So what caused that transformation? And there's always been this question, how do we explain this transformation? And the simple answer is it's not one factor, it's a variety of factors. And this approach enabled me to explain some of these factors. First of all, there are powerful pressures, external pressures onto the Kenyan system. The advent of the microfinance movement, which shifted focus from large companies and high-income consumers to SMEs and micro SMEs, and the need for them to access financial services, and a host of institutions being set up to facilitate that, connected to informal financial groups, drew the attention of the regulator and the private sector to the potential of the base of the pyramid, quote unquote, in accessing formal or providing formal financial services. Of course, ICTs, ATM networks, the internet, and all that coming into Kenya also made things possible, which previously weren't. And I would say also here the Millennium Development Goals put pressure on government to begin to focus on this 80% that were previously excluded from formal financial services. So then you're probably aware of the story of how a variety of actors, in this case Vodafone UK, Safaricom, which is its subsidiary, part subsidiary in Kenya, a microfinance institution in Kenya, together with several actors who met over time to brainstorm on options, discovered that we could potentially use mobile phones, an existing technology. They had considered several other technologies which were not accessible, as a way of delivering or as a delivery channel for formal financial services. So what was interesting for me was a participatory approach in developing this network of actors. So it wasn't just a bank, it wasn't just a telecom, but involvement of informal groups in that process, involvement of the microfinance industry in that process to collect ideas on what could work. Also, Also, what was interesting is the mindset of the regulator, who, despite contestation, and especially due to the pressure to extend financial services beyond the 20%, was more willing to have an experimental mindset. In fact, this is a quote from the central bank governor, who, in response to contestation from the commercial banking industry, said, we are going to experiment first, then we'll regulate, which is quite risky if you're thinking about money. And there was discussion about systemic risk to the financial system in Kenya if mobile money innovation turns out to be fail. Finally, also, what was interesting for me was the importance of considering household behavior and local cultural norms in how people exchange money and use money, and developing a technology based on that. I'm sure this is common in other African countries, where the breadwinner, who is based in the city center, who has a formal employment somewhere, has the responsibility to take care of his family members or her family members, sometimes distributed geographically in the country. There was a gap in how to transfer money regularly to your family members or people who depend on you. So a campaign, or kind of the value proposition that launched mobile money and made it legitimate and relevant locally, was this idea of send money home regularly. We are giving you a delivery channel that allows you to send money through your social networks on a regular basis in a cost-effective way, which to some extent explains why mobile money has not been successful in other contexts that don't have this cultural basis, this cultural orientation of sharing income within families and extended communities. So then, my point here is, with this approach, I was able to see all these factors that came together to facilitate the breakthrough or the success and diffusion of mobile money innovation in Kenya. And as I've been continuing with research in this area, right now I'm focusing on frugal and inclusive innovation. I'm looking at healthcare in Kenya, primary healthcare. I find myself attracted to the other side of the coin. Much of the research on transitions and sustainability focuses on large incumbents, on state actors, on large farms. Yeah? But not so much on the 80% of the informal economy, or 70% or 60%, depending on which African country you're going to. And these actors can have implications on what trajectory a transition takes, even though they're not necessarily participating in the development of the technology. So this is a question that's interesting to explore. Why do certain technologies work? Why did mobile money work? And why do others not work? And for me, partly, is the recognition of these marginal actors, non-state actors, the informal sector, marginalized groups, nomadic communities, etc. Yeah? So then, in my work, I'm thinking, especially while using this transitions approach, how do I conceptualize and shed light on the role these actors play in how societies evolve, whether or not they're involved in the experimental process, or whether or not they're involved in developing technologies that are launched every day. Also for me, what's interesting is bottom-up initiatives. There was some allusion made to this earlier today. And the question for me has been, can this scale up enough to induce transitions? Of course, this is a question that's being investigated. How do we scale, whether to scale or not, how and when? And dealing with indigenous knowledge systems which inform these bottom-up initiatives, and how those, especially in kind of a codified, formalized knowledge system, can be incorporated or influence developments in a given environment. Also, even with my mobile money research, one realization even as I showed you the numbers, right now about 20, based on the last household survey that was done, 19% of Kenyans are absolutely excluded from financial services. 80% are included, 19% are not. So mobile financial services, mobile money, has not reached 19%. Is mobile money the ultimate solution? But this makes me think this is a distributional consequence of that transformation. And makes me raise some questions. How can we account for some of these unintended or unanticipated consequences of transitions in this kind of environments? Yeah? Posing the question, transitions by whom for whom? Who is driving the transition? Who benefits? Who loses? Yeah, something to take into account when thinking about transitions in this context. Then finally, how do we conceptualize inclusive forms of transitions? And this, of course, is linked to the second last point. Again, this is an open question, which will be worth discussing.
Point you made, is that something you've looked into? So the remaining excluded population, do you have any hypotheses about what the distributional issues were?
Yes, the cheapest mobile phone is about $10, $8. There are households that cannot afford to acquire an $8 phone.
So is that not?
So already there's that cutoff point. Then in this case of mobile money, the tariffs, the costs of transaction costs of conducting a single transaction for low value transactions has been very high. Until recently, the Safaricom eliminated transaction costs for very low value transactions below $1. Yeah? But before then, it would cost up to 10% to transfer $1. That is too costly for a family that's living on $1 a day. Then telecommunications infrastructure was not widely spread over the country. So there are parts of the country that could not access cellular service. So therefore they could not use mobile money. Yeah. So that explains the absolute exclusion. So people who do not have access to the infrastructure are even further excluded by an innovation that we thought would address the base of the pyramid, the absolute base of the pyramid, which now puts the question is this the right intervention for that segment?
Can I just make a comment? You seem to be, you're saying that 20% cannot be reached. But I see it in a much more positive sense that from the ratio of 20% not reached, you now have 80% being reached. And still 20% being reached. Because you don't seem to be very happy about that. I think there's been, I think there's been a great transformation in a short time. Okay?
Shall we keep this question
so
after?
I think we have
the last question to discuss. Let's keep it for the discussion. Yeah, so take a note and then we open it up, okay?
Yeah.